having talked a little bit about AI, I'm now going to ask Ed a few questions. So turn the tables.
Oh, no.
And there's 3 or 4 topics I want to just get Ed's view on and what that might mean for our industry, but also just all of us as citizens of the world. So one, I've heard you talk before about this idea of ubiquitous computing. And I maybe if you could just explain to people what that is and how that might play out over the next few years.
Yeah, I mean, it's a concept that originally came about by a researcher at the famous Palo Alto Research Center, a guy called Mark Wisner. And PARC was a development center, innovation center that Xerox created because they knew that there was going to be a limited market basically in photocopiers, and eventually people would run out of the need for photocopiers. What was the future office going to look like? So great idea, fantastic concepts and technology came out of that, but, couldn't really replace photocopiers in the end of the day. Mark Wisner came out with this idea of ubiquitous computing, or I quite like the term calm computing. And the idea is that we move away from the current paradigm, or the paradigm we've had for, I guess, the last 50 years, where a computer is a discrete machine that you go to and you do particular tasks. So, we have a computer in the corner of our office. We now carry little computers in our pockets in the form of smartphones, but they are, discrete devices that do particular tasks. His idea is that actually the computing moves into the cloud and our environment becomes both sensors of a computer in the cloud, but also displays, so that we kind of interact with the environment as we're moving through that. And that's the form of computing. So it's a bit like, I suppose, those, science fiction movies that we all grew up with, where you say, computer, do something, and somewhere in the environment, a computer responds and, changes the world in some way. I think that's where I think we will move to that place eventually. The waypoint, I think, on that journey is probably augmented reality, extended reality devices that are going to be probably the big thing for the next decade, where I definitely foresee us moving away from smartphones to other forms of wearable technology that are in some ways less intrusive. I don't know about yourself, but when we travel on public transport, everyone seems fixated on their little mobile phone in front of them, and that's what they're doing, consuming content. And it very much gets in the way of social interaction. It gets in the way of you understanding the environment around you. Yeah. If you can change that device to be something that perhaps just, pops into your consciousness when it needs to tell you a sports result, or the fact that your train's running late, or the fact that your wife wants you to pick up some salad in the supermarket on the way home, I think we begin to live life again in the real world. Yeah. And that comes through this idea of computing being ubiquitous around us.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw the stuff it was in the papers last week about Weatherspoons, where Tim Martin was saying he hates apps for ordering in pubs, and I'm totally with him. I despise it. It just gets in the way of what being in a pub actually is. So in this world, if we take it into geospatial, So how might this look in a future world where there is this calm computing?
Well, I mean, I think geospatial, like it is actually in many respects, is this kind of invisible infrastructure that will power ubiquitous computing, because fundamentally you need to know where things are to be able to interact with them. And that probably, though, will come again through a different way of perhaps conceptualizing space. Traditionally, if you think in terms of GIS, we've built GIS databases that are very precise, locating features in the real world relative to some sort of datum in British National Grid or latitude and longitude, and we know where everything is quite precisely. It's very expensive to do that, very expensive to maintain that. And then we have some sort of a technology that is able to locate where we are relative to that, and that's GNSS, or it's based on Wi-Fi triangulation, or all sorts of different technologies. They give you that little blue dot to tell you where you are. What I foresee happening perhaps in the next, 5 or 6 years, again with the emergence of augmented reality, extended reality, is the positioning that we do will be very much relative to where we are, and perhaps based on what's called visual positioning systems, where you use AI probably to recognize the environment around you, to recognize you're sitting in a room that has cameras and lights, and I'm sitting next to Blair, and actually recognizes you as a human because it recognizes, your face and your features. And in many ways, it sees the world in the same way that we see the world, not as lots of discrete database features, but as real world objects that we interact with. And we end up building this very detailed, very rich model that represents what we see, our line of sight. And that's a very different approach, I think, to how we think about geospatial data and technology.
Yeah, fascinating. I love how science fiction always gets there first.
Yeah.
Because, what you're describing is you see it in films like Blade Runner or Gattaca.
Exactly right.
And you're in this world and little cues are popping up over people's heads and all of that stuff.
Yeah, and a lot of that is always visual, but I think probably maybe the kind of user interface of the future is going to be audible. So, we often, well, many of us, spend quite a lot of our days with headphones on or earpieces. You could put a camera in an earpiece that can sense the environment around you. It can be talking to you. It's much less intrusive than, things popping up in your line of sight. That might be the main user interface that we all, are using over the next decade or so.
Yeah, or brain implants. Who knows?
Well, I think we're some way away from the brain implant, but you never know.
So again, as a location planner, again, we kick around ideas, and we kind of like the idea of the location planner out doing site visits, and this world is populated around them as they're walking around the street. So they're seeing, the patterns we are used to seeing in a map application.
Yeah,
they're there in the real world. You're seeing how rich the area is. You're seeing how much the property went for. You're seeing the rental values. You're seeing the turnovers. You're seeing the catchments. And I think that will be a really cool world.
I think it would be. And I think you're also seeing an important aspect that we struggle with, because we come from a background in quantitative geography. We like measuring things and applying data and statistics. But actually, we all live in a qualitative world. We make value judgments. We see one neighborhood as being different to another neighborhood, not because of an intrinsic understanding of spatial statistics, but what it feels like, what our sense is. And I think this technology, in many ways, gives us a better way to represent the qualitative geography. Why does Clapham feel different to Brixton? They do feel different, but they're very similar neighbourhoods in many ways. Yeah. And that will be a whole new set of insights, I think.
Yeah, and replicating some of that humanity. Again, when I go on site visits with experienced location planners, it's wonderful to see them at work. That I remember we drove up to a site we were going to assess, and he said, "Don't even stop. It's a no." We called it drive-by site visits. Didn't even need to get out of the car.
Yeah, enough. That's it. We'll keep moving.
Humans are good. They're judgment value machines, aren't we?
Yeah.
So I'm going to slightly change topics from this future-looking one to another key concern for us when we think about modelling and we think about predictive modelling. So we're trying to say what's going to happen in the future if we do this. And some people make claims about how much more accurate we're going to be able to be with GFMs and other approaches and new data. And there's a counter argument that says there's a fundamental limit. And what it is. How accurate do you think we're going to be able to get?
Oh, that's a really good question. I'm not sure I have an answer for that. I mean, partially I think this is fundamentally different. We're now with, deep learning, with the emergence of foundation models, geospatial or not, we've moved fundamentally from this, deterministic worldview to one that's fundamentally based about probability. And that, that's not a bad thing. I think an understanding of probability is one of those really important transferable skills that we could all probably deal with. We'd understand the world much better if we understood probability. But I think it's hard, though, to then communicate in terms of accuracy and absoluteness, because you're not saying that. And maybe it's a better reflection of the real world. Maybe we shouldn't be asking those questions in terms of absolute accuracy, because it's more difficult to measure. And I think this is a key problem for us to deal with when it comes to testing models. If your whole testing infrastructure was based on a deterministic worldview where X plus Y equals Z, if you now would say, well, actually, we can only really do this in a sense of probabilities, how do you test whether your model is working or not, is more accurate or less accurate? So I think I just struggle with the term accuracy when we're dealing with models. We have to understand it in a probabilistic sense, and we're talking about the likelihood of a result that's representative of what we're trying to model. That's a better way of thinking about it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I don't think we ever get to a world where everything is absolutely modeled out in the future. That's just not the way the universe appears to work. There's so much chaos and feedback loops and dynamism within it and changes, and it's so I agree. I think it's super exciting, but the idea of being able to forecast things hyper accurately, I think, is for the birds. So if we just finish these things, it's always nice to just reflect and think, right, 5 years in the future, because these exercises are no one's going to. Well, maybe they will. They will come back and go, hang on, you said
in 5 years' time they will come back and laugh at us for the predictions that we're just about to make.
Yeah. 5 years I always like, because it's a nice time frame, because it's far enough away that you can have some fun with it, but it's not so far that you're like, well, I don't know, we're all going to be living in whatever. So 5 years, what are we thinking? What's going to look different in our day-to-day life, in our worlds, in the world of work, in geospatial? So we're in 2031. I'm about to retire.
Yes. I've been retired a few years and taken so many more photographs. I think the world will be probably richer in terms of data sets. And I think one of the big consequences of the AI that we've been talking about over these discussions is that AI is going to allow us to capture much more data and richer data. We talk about graph databases that will have a big impact in, I think, geospatial, in terms of improving the quality of how we represent the world around us, getting those connections that are there implicitly within the data that we've captured up until now, but making those connections explicit. That will, improve our understanding of the world around us, not just in terms of the social space and in terms of economics, but also in terms of our understanding of the environment. Those connections are equally important. I think there will be more compute available to us, largely because we won't be training those big foundation models anymore, but we'll have all of this compute available to us to do other things. I'm not sure how far along we would have gone in this kind of journey to ubiquitous computing. I think these things, particularly if it's a change in terms of user interaction and how we consume technology, I think that always happens more slowly than we imagine it might do.
Yeah.
So I think maybe we'll still be probably largely using mobile phones and laptops and computers and tablets and so on. But, the early adopters certainly will be wearing wearable technology, and that will be a bigger part of what we do. It's funny, next year the iPhone will only be 20 years old, but it feels like it's had a bigger impact than that. So 5 years on, well, the iPhone, whatever that will be, the iPhone 25 or whatever, that's what we'll still be using.
Yeah, that is fascinating. The way some things change and some things don't. So last night I watched the 2026 comedy show, which was the follow-on from the 2012 W1A. But anyway, I then went back and watched the 2012 show, and it was remarkable how similar the world of 2012 looked to the world of 2026. Mobile phones, laptops, flat panel screens, everyone on their phones. And that was 15 years ago.
Yeah.
So there is a counter argument that goes, not much has really changed.
No. And I think, I don't think 5 years is very long.
Yeah.
I think in the 1960s, 5 years was a long time. In, the 2020s, 5 years isn't very long at all.
Yeah. Pete Thiel's hypothesis that nothing's actually changed since about 1960.
Yeah.
It's the tech, the cars, the ships, everything's the same, just a bit.
I've been disappointed. I grew up with Jerry Anderson shows and I should have been living on the moon by now, but just didn't work out like that.
Here we go. I'll just, on the future, the one thing I always bang the drum for, if you look through history, you tend to see massive societal revolutions when there's revolutions in transport.
Yes.
So cars, planes, ships, they're the big sort of benchmarks where, right, the world changed when we got planes. The world changed when we got cars.
Yeah.
And I still hold out for the autonomous vehicle, which I know has been promised for 10 years now. But I still hold out that if that happens, the world will change.
No, I think you're right. I completely concur on that one. And it's funny, I was asked a question earlier this week about, great geography successes. I scratched my head a little bit. You think about something like the Elizabeth Line, Crossrail, that being developed in London, it's fundamentally changed the geography of London. It's now much easier to move east and west across the city than it was, just 10 years ago. And we kind of just take that for granted. But that's had a really big impact. And that's fundamentally geography. We're changing the dynamic of space and time within the city. And that's what we do. So I think you're right. Transport, whether it's a whole new mode of transport or a change to the transport infrastructure, that can have a big impact.
Yeah. So Farringdon has obviously now become the epicenter of London, whereas it used to probably be...
Well, I don't know. From southwest London, I'm not sure I agree with you on that one.
So yeah, definitely transport revolutions. And in 5 years, I think we were having a chat in the pub and you said autonomous vehicles is essentially a solved problem now.
It's from a technology point of view, it's absolutely a solved problem. It's all about regulation now. And we're beginning to see the regulation changing in Europe now that will allow more autonomous driving. But, if you're in the States, it's not a big deal to jump in your Tesla and it to drive you to the shopping mall or wherever you want to go, or jump into, an Uber or a Waymo and be driven autonomously instead of a taxi driver driving you. So it's there, it's just not equally distributed yet. And that, distribution is purely down to regulation. It's not about the technology. It's not about the data, because fundamentally it's a sensing problem rather than a data problem. And I agree with you. It can easily come in that 5-year period if the regulation goes in the right direction.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to leave it there, but there is another whole podcast on regulation because that is just going to be huge. And the final point I'll say about the future is another thing I think is going to come is there's going to be ubiquitous high quality data. Because at the moment, our world, the amount of time we spend just stuffing around trying to get data right, and AI is going to really help us with that.
Yeah.
It's going to make us get canonical, definitive global data sets really, really quickly. So
and those data that's connected, as you said, that whole idea of graph databases, linked data, it's kind of a very niche subject, but incredibly powerful if done properly.
And the reason I bring up regulation is it then opens up a whole nother challenge is who owns this data? Because the whole ownership of data is so weakly regulated because, you can't copyright a fact. You do it all through this weird database rights convention, which no one bloody understands. But if you're in a world where these AIs are crawling the world and producing data,
we have to stop. We just created a whole series of new podcasts for us to do in the future. But in terms of this series of podcasts, thank you everyone for listening. Blair and I could carry on talking for hours and hours, but I hope you've appreciated these shows we've done. They've been great fun. hope you've got a new and well-founded understanding of what great guys Geolytix are and great people to work with. Thank you for listening. And until the next series of the Geolytix podcast, thank you very much.
Thank you.